So hi and welcome everyone. On behalf of IPCIDE, I'm pleased to welcome everyone to the third webinar. Oops, okay, we're not streaming anymore. Okay, that was our IT person. I think something's gone a bit. Okay, so in the interest of time, until he fixes whatever was wrong, I'll just go through a couple of small housekeeping thing that I do for these webinars. I'll when you're coming up to like 2 minutes of your time, I'll drop you a private message in your chat. That's 2 minutes remaining. Five for Dr. Stilgoe, the first message, and then two for his second message. And for Anulekha and Sadhana, I'll do two and then one. Does that work? Okay. Okay, Rajkumar can. So,
Can I start?
okay. Okay, take two. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of IPSIDE, I'm pleased to welcome you to the third webinar in our series of Ethics and Governance of AI. Through this series, we aim to advance critical conversations on AI governance, ethics, and responsible innovation as India prepares for the AI Impact Summit in February. So in this webinar, what we do is we invite leading experts to share their research and perspectives and invite discussants from the Indian landscape to reflect on those themes in our domestic contexts. And by doing so, we hope to encourage conversations and exchange of ideas on how these topics are playing out in globally and ensure that ethics and responsible governance of AI remain at the forefront of India's landscape and also are pivotal to the discussions at the summit. So for today's webinar, we have Dr. Jack Stilgoe, who's going to present his paper titled Visions, Values, Voices, a survey of AI researchers. He is a professor of science and technology policy at UCL, and he researches the governance of emerging tech. He has been a part of the UK Responsible AI Leadership Team and has worked with the UK's Economic and Social Research Council and Engineering Physical Sciences Research Council to develop frameworks for responsible innovation, which are now being actually used and implemented by those councils. He is also a fellow of the Turing Institute and a trustee of the Royal Institution. And as discussants, we have Dr. Nandi, who's an independent researcher, and Sadhana Sanjay, the lead and research policy engagement at IT for Change, who's running a little late and will be joining us soon.
She's here, I think.
Oh, I see. Okay. Hi, Sadhana. Hi. So with that, I'll not take up any of your discussion time and ask Dr. Jack Stilgoe to begin with his paper presentation.
Thank you very much, Shiva. I'm delighted to be here. I'm sorry, I'm suddenly affected by a very rare blinding sunshine in London, which those of you that know London in December is not common. But I'll just share some slides because I've got a few graphs and things. And so yeah, thank you very much for having me. So I'm going to be talking about some work that we did as part of the Responsible AI program. A lot of the work for this was actually done by a team of master students that we recruited here in London. And what we really wanted to do, I guess, just to frame this piece of work, is we wanted to understand what AI researchers themselves thought. So the scientists, if you like, on the inside of artificial intelligence. I come from a disciplinary background in science and technology studies. I'm a sociologist of science. I've always been very interested in how and why scientists do what they want to do. And in this case, the sense was just that we knew very little about what scientists actually thought about how and why they were doing AI research. And we also, from a sort of standpoint of responsible innovation, recognized that what scientists thought was important, not just for epistemological reasons, but also for moral and political reasons, that scientists can, should, and do typically go above and beyond just questions of knowledge in how they contribute to the constitution of emerging technologies. The starting point for this work was a sort of recognition that the public debate about what was at stake around artificial intelligence was becoming a bit peculiar, with the release of ChatGPT, acknowledged by many governments as a sort of Sputnik moment, we saw this debate that on one side seemed extremely utopian, on the other side seemed apocalyptic. And yet, for those of us that dug into this discussion, we saw that often it was the same voices expressing at times flip-flopping views between utopia and dystopia. So we saw the framing of risks in just the last few years taking on this tone that seemed peculiar, often characterized in existential terms, that the danger with AI is that it would contribute in some way to the end of all humanity. I was sufficiently interested in the characterization of these risks to ask the BBC to help with a short documentary that I did a couple of years ago, asking some of the key players in this space, not just, was this risk real, but just trying to understand where it came from. So why was risk being imagined in these terms? Interested not just in the sort of calculus of these risks, but in maybe the politics that hid behind it. So why was the risk being imagined in these terms? And this quote, so I spoke to the eminent scientist Geoffrey Hinton, who would go on to win the Nobel Prize, about why he had chosen to highlight this imagined threat of artificial intelligence. And the most interesting thing I think that he said to me was that this was a sort of political calculus about the need to build consensus in an increasingly polarized world, and a sort of sense that governments hadn't been able to deliver adequate regulation. So it was an understandable desire to wake governments up and to, by presenting this as a sort of totalizing risk to shake people out of their complacency. More recently, we've seen concerns about AI being expressed in perhaps the most alarmist terms, but this book got a lot of coverage. And again, just to sort of step away from whether we think this risk assessment is right or wrong, the thing I was intrigued with at the start of this book by Eliezer Yudkowsky was that they explicitly say that this isn't about the AI that is in the world at the moment. This is about future AI. It's, if you like, saying this is a concern about an imagined technology, about an imagined risk, and so it leapfrogged questions of current technology and current risk. And I was reminded of a comment by Joseph Weizenbaum, one of the sort of early pioneers of artificial intelligence research, who is often neglected now, about this language of inevitability and future consequences as a way to leapfrog current responsibilities. Within the sort of Weizenbaum tradition, we saw recently a really interesting paper published by these two authors, who some of you might know as the authors of the AI snake oil book, trying to puncture what we might call AI exceptionalism, the idea that all of the issues around AI are unique and different from other technologies, to draw connections with previous technologies. And here, there is also a line, a sort of growing tradition of research that explores other sets of risks from emerging technologies that might in some ways look much more normal, the sort of normal risks of artificial intelligence technologies. And this actually comes from the company DeepMind, one of the AI pioneers, who, to their credit, have teams of people looking into these risks as well. The sort of discussion, if you like, the discussion between the existential, apocalyptic, and the socio-technical came to a head, and this is relevant for the upcoming India summit, when the first AI summit took place in Britain, the then Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, drew attention to, if you like, all of the non-existential risks. And this contributed actually to quite rapidly reframing the discussion and grounding it much more, which I regard as a constructive contribution. What we're seeing now, maybe to bring things up to date, is that AI has entered the public imagination in ways that are, for various groups of people, real in a different sense. So, many people's experience of AI in the world might be in terms of misinformation or various forms of slop that turn up on their social media feeds, or, highly engaged, politicized debates about, for example, infrastructures being built with substantial investments in artificial intelligence. So the politics of AI are up for grabs. We have an expert debate that seems disconnected from public experience. As part of the Responsible AI program, we commissioned a set of surveys. So this was a large public survey that was run by colleagues at the Ada Lovelace Institute and the Turing Institute. And I encourage you to go and have a look at that public survey, because it's an excellent piece of work. What we wanted to do to complement that was to ask AI researchers what they thought of some of these issues, because members of the public are often asked, well, what do you think about AI? And the sort of implicit frame behind a lot of those efforts is that public views are problematized because the public are seen as, in some way, potential blockers to innovation and adoption of new technologies. We, within science and technology studies, come from a disciplinary tradition in which we think taking public views seriously, not just as, in terms of public deficits or public reluctance, reactions to potential adoption. We also think that the public view should be seen as a source of intelligence. So the sort of hypotheses driving our survey of AI researchers come out of that disciplinary tradition. So the first hypothesis would be that rather than the views of Geoffrey Hinton and some AI companies representing the actual contingencies of AI research, that if you get closer to the actual research coalface, the people doing the work, you might find more uncertainty, right? So this idea that's sometimes expressed as distance lends enchantment. So that actually it's the scientists that are closest to the research that are most uncertain, but sometimes that uncertainty doesn't get represented in public. And we also wanted to test this idea that that AI researchers might have a sort of deficit model of public attitudes, in which the presumption was that public lack of trust or public reluctance could be explained by a lack of ignorance or awareness about the technology, which is something that's been challenged a lot by social scientists. So we commissioned, well, actually, no, we carried out this, our team of MSc researchers and some colleagues carried out this survey, which we think is the largest ever survey of AI researchers. And I can talk about methods if people want to dig into the methodological choices there. This survey was pretty broad ranging. It was quite an intensive piece. So respondents were typically spending 20 minutes or so responding to a whole range of questions about risks, benefits, but also questions about the upstream politics of AI systems. So things like where data comes from, how responsibility might be divided up, that sort of thing. And I'll dig into a few of the findings. Obviously, I can't present anything, and please do ask me if you'd like to know more about any of this. The first one, I guess, unsurprisingly, is that AI researchers on the whole are more positive than members of the public. And I should say at this stage that one of the things that we did with a lot of our question choice is we asked questions that had already been asked in public surveys so that we could enable those comparisons between public views and researchers' views and try to interrogate overlaps and gaps. Understandably, AI researchers are more positive about the technology than members of the public are. And when we ask them about particular areas of suggested benefit, we see some interesting gaps. In terms of imagined benefits, and down at the bottom there, you can see members of the public expressing a lot of skepticism that they can't see what the benefits of AI will be for people's lives. So a lot of disagreements on what the potential benefits might be of the technology, but interestingly, much more agreement between the researchers and the members of the public on the risks of the technology. And this seemed quite interesting to us. So this was a surprise of that, if you like, the risks were being imagined in very similar ways for the people closest to the technology. You know, you see some areas of disagreement, but in most cases there's a lot of overlap in terms of the prioritization of those risks. Another way that we went into this conversation was to ask, just from a sort of bottom-up sense, without trying to impose our own frames on these risks, we wanted to know, AI researchers, you know, what sort of front-of-mind concerns are you most interested in? And what we did was we got, you know, more than, well, almost 4,000 free text responses to this question. And we then coded those responses into categories that you can see there with the percentage of the total represented. And what you can see is that the sort of existential extreme risk concerns were there, and you know, a substantial number of AI researchers expressed that as their major concern, but it's still only, you know, single digit percentages of the total. In most cases, the concerns that came out were far more everyday ones. So, and I should also just add, incidentally, for those of you that sort of follow the terms of art in the debate, as well as that 3% figure, we might also add that 4% figure that you see around alignment and control. You know, these sort of terms of art that among AI researchers stand for similar ways of imagining these sorts of extreme risks, but it's still, you know, it's not big numbers. So we were really interested in digging into that. One of the other questions that we asked was this question about the imagined future of the research field, and we wanted to, you know, find some ways to tease apart different groups here. So we asked one question: agree or disagree? Do you think artificial general intelligence, again another of these terms of art, is inevitable? And you see about 50% of people, of AI researchers, thinking that AGI was in some way inevitable. That becomes quite interesting, because what you can then do is cut up the data here with reference to that question, and you find that the people who think it is inevitable are much more likely to worry about existential risk, for example, and much less likely to worry about the fact that this is an extremely hyped area of emerging technology. So we can make some sort of distinctions there. It's also, I think, interesting to note some of the demographic correlations there. So we asked about, you know, country, we asked about gender, we asked about sector, whether people were working in universities or companies or elsewhere. And we find that, just to pick out one example, female respondents much more likely than male respondents to worry about questions of bias as a concern. In effect, how AI systems might either contribute to exacerbating existing biases or how the impacts of the technology might be felt unevenly across different groups in society. To pick out just a few of the other concerns that struck us as compelling and interesting. So in Britain, there has been a high-profile debate, but it's a debate that has sort of taken AI researchers a little bit by surprise about this question of copyright. So, musicians, authors, and others have taken issue with the use of their intellectual property as training data for AI systems, and we wanted to know whether that was the sort of thing that AI researchers were worried about. And we were surprised at the degree of worry, right? If you like, the sort of caricature might be that anything available on the internet, any data that you can find is fair game and can be used for the training of AI models. But we found a high degree of concern. Only a quarter of researchers thought that model was a legitimate one. And again, similar sort of levels with members of the public. There were concerns about inequities in risk and benefit. Again, so rather than this characterization of there being one totalizing risk to humanity in general, we found that the reality was much more textured than that. We found concern about trade-offs between the explainability of AI systems and their accuracy. And we found concern about industry playing too big a role in setting priorities for AI research. Large majority of researchers think that, recognizing that our sample was skewed towards university researchers, right? So we can see some concerns there. So let me just end with some conclusions, and then I'll be so happy to dig into any of this or ask about or talk about our choices. I mean, my sense is that there is the potential at a time when the hype about AI is enormous, the investment in it is enormous, but the debate is being controlled by a very small number of very high profile, powerful voices. There is the potential for a much more diverse, much more interesting debate, and for AI researchers themselves to contribute to that, right? To not just informing that debate in the sort of conventional linear model in which, scientific findings become one aspect of that debate, but actually for researchers themselves to be participants. We see various ideas of responsibility in play here. So there was a surprising desire expressed by researchers to, if you like, take responsibility for outcomes of AI systems in the real world. But also we saw this, a fairly familiar division of moral labor in which researchers develop things, put them in the world, and then the users of those things take responsibility for the outcomes. We do see gaps between what researchers think and what members of the public think, but we would just caution against interpreting those gaps as information deficits, which is often how these things are interpreted, as though, well, public views need to be corrected so that the public can become trusting adopters and users of this technologies. Typically their risk assessments might be presented as in some way irrational and therefore need to be corrected, etc., etc. We think that the AI debate does not seem to be going in that way, in the same way as some other technology debates have been in the past. And so there is this opportunity for direct dialogue, and if you like, a this might lead to a call for bringing out some of the citizen within the scientists, to encourage the researchers that are involved, researchers within companies and researchers within universities, to become active participants in this debate. So that's where I would draw the some of the implications from some of this work. I have other data, other slides I can ping up if people want to interrogate particular things, but I'm mostly now want to say thank you and look forward to the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you, Jack. There's a lot to unpack in that's what seems to be a very dense paper full of a lot of interesting tidbits of information. Um, uh, yeah, so now I'd like to ask Dr. Nandi to give her comments. And just as a sort of, I'm just throwing this out there, like, because I think this is the first time in this series we're discussing a survey and its results. So, like, ideally, how we go about it is we have the keynote remarks, and then we have discussion remarks, and then a short discussion. But if either of you or any of you want to have your remarks and then also ask Jack some questions about his survey or his data, then please you can utilize the time any way you like. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Jack, for that presentation. And I did kind of have a chance to kind of go through the paper a little bit. I look forward to reading it more deeply. Thanks for that contribution in general, and for Shiva for having us all together here. And I mean, first off, I do think it's a really important and much needed contribution because, like you said, these are topics that are often discussed normatively or argumentatively. How particular perceptions might get encoded within the design, but it's useful and refreshing to have, some kind of data to kind of back up some of those ideas. So it's very useful in that regard and very refreshing in that regard. And I do feel it provides a lot of fertile ground for like further research, particularly in terms of how aspects of technical knowledge, professionalization, intent, expertise, and so on kind of get encoded in the design and so on. So it just kind of gives a sense of how AI researchers think about particular issues and how particular aspects of their expertise and professionalizations then get encoded into the design and has cascading effects for deployment and use at one level, but also how intent and design practices might diverge. While there is a consciousness of the risks, but there are certain constraints of what that researchers work in terms of this training data that they're given with, which is one of the concerns that I kind of read in your paper that they expressed. So there are some constraints which might not, the intent might not be able to fully encapsulate or address some of those concerns, and those risks and perceptions of risks remain outstanding going forward. So I think that kind of provides a very fertile ground. I mean, this kind of information and data provides a very fertile ground for looking at some of those issues a little more deeply. And also, what was interesting is I noticed the composition of the survey participants. And I would think that if this is something you are looking at doing iteratively or recurringly, but perhaps the composition would need to be like at 78% male, right? So just kind of having a bit more balanced identity distribution would also kind of help surface some of the anxieties that people with marginalized identities or women within the system might have, and how and this is obviously a very open debate in the policy circles, that how the composition of researchers, their gender identities, their levels of expertise have an effect on the kinds of systems that are designed and the kinds of people it includes and excludes. So if you might think of, diversifying the kind of the respondent pool, it might lead to a little bit more interesting insights about, the kind of risks that other researchers might face. But also, also 75%, I think, were university professors. So they are fundamentally involved in fundamental research, like as opposed to applied research in terms of what AI researchers and companies or startups may be even involved in. And with universities, I think there is a training in ethics, there is a training in kind of taking responsibility for your research. So that might also be coming across as a sort of heightened sense of responsibility, maybe. It could be because I mean, if I recall my doctoral training, there's a lot of emphasis on ensuring that our research is ethically compliant and bound. So I think academia carries a lot of that responsibility, sense of responsibility in research with them. So I think it would be interesting to also see how this perspective kind of juxtaposes with researchers, let's say in companies or startups or people who are doing more of applied or AI research in terms of applications and so on. So, that's one kind of set of comments that I had in terms of, how I deeply value the contribution in terms of how it helps us take forward some of the conversations that we have within the policy circuits in a little more concrete manner. But also it kind of led me to engage with some of the two questions that I have grappled with both academically as well as in terms of policy. And one is this, how do you kind of look at technical alignment, like how AI research goes about doing technical alignment, and in terms of how it then is a little more responsive to the nuances of social and contextual granularities in general. So how do you kind of manage the technical alignment operationally in terms of aligning with social norms and values in practice? And the other is how do you then kind of, because with AI development and deployment happening within a distributed set of actors within an ecosystem, how do you then distribute the responsibility? And who is responsible and who then becomes, and these are policy questions that we engage with, that how do you design those responsibility structures, those structures of responsibility essentially. And particularly, I mean, I come from an information systems background. So when we think of alignment, it's always a continuous and iterative process. You continually align a particular system as the context throws up, new information. But that research has always been within the context of an organization. So particularly when we look at AI research or AI as a technology, is constantly mutating, evolving, learning, and is general purpose, how do we then keep aligning to, as the tech develops particular specific challenges at one level? And also when you look at the
Anulekha, we're losing you.
and so on. But then how do you then combine the intent of scalability with the sheer complexity of how different contexts, social norms, and legal norms are so divergent and different? So how do you kind of manage that tension as you go forward? But also when we are looking at AI ecosystems, particularly, we have different combinations of foundational models, software, codes, interfaces, and so on. And also how do you bifurcate the responsibility at the level of the deployer and at the level of the user? Because both contain certain degrees of liability in terms of how you use them and how the design is structured and enables or unenables certain exclusions and inclusions. So how do you then kind of distribute that responsibility and ascribe responsibility within this kind of exceptionally complex ecosystem? And how different, because it's almost it's kind of opaque in terms of not just the AI model in itself, the foundational model in itself, but how that model kind of then interacts with stuff built layered on top of it, like the softwares and interfaces, and the data that it is being trained on at the point of application. So it becomes incredibly kind of complex to kind of unravel some of those threads and determine that where perhaps does responsibility lie. And these are questions that I have kind of grappled with. So I would really love to kind of hear your take on it. And also, in general, how do you kind of look at responsibility across contexts? Because in certain scenarios, it's quite crystal clear, like you wouldn't want discrimination on the basis of identity. So that's a given. It's an easy kind of thing to kind of implement in terms of, okay, we won't have, and if the system is by default excluding certain segments of the population, we need to course correct on that. But there are other areas when it comes to using AI to moderate content on platforms. There's a number of issues that intersect with it, whether it's legal norms, whether it's platform governance, and individual liberties. So it becomes a little bit of a admixture of different priorities there. So just to sum up, I kind of wanted to bring attention to just the 2 points that I mentioned in terms of how how do we manage kind of scaling responsibility while at the same time kind of remaining a little mindful of how responsibility is intimately tied to local contexts and social contexts in the area of implementation. So how do we then kind of look at a structured system of responsibility within AI governance going forward? Thank you for that.
Thank you, Anulekha. That was really insightful comments that you had. So now, I'd like to also invite Sadhana first to speak, and then I think towards the end we can all have a discussion because I'm sure she'll also have some a take on what both Jack and Anulekha have just said. So after Sadhana's remarks, we can just go on and have a free-flowing discussion on what we. That's it. Okay, thank you. Okay, Sadhana, over to you, please.
Thanks so much, Shiva, and thanks for having us all together over here. And Jack, huge thanks for that amazing presentation and for what I found such an interesting survey and research idea to implement. Just a few remarks from my side, and if you don't mind, I'm going to use your findings as an entry point to also pick your brain on some of the things that it provoked in my mind. And just by way of introduction, I work at a civil society organization called IT for Change, where we look at issues of governance of emerging technologies, and I'm a lawyer by training, although I haven't practiced in years. And the explosion of AI into the public discourse, given my location, is something that I've been able to see firsthand over the last 2-3 years. And I think that much like the early days of the internet, there was a sense of initial optimism and fascination with the possibilities of what this technology might afford us as a society and also as a species. But I think over the last year or so, it's kind of given way to more hesitance and more reluctance, and there is an air of apprehensiveness in public discourse, at least when I talk to my friends and my family, or to people who are generally located outside of the digital domain. So one thing that I want to maybe begin by saying is how unique and necessary I find your research a contribution to a very crowded, confusing, and oftentimes contradictory public discourse. So I think it really is something that helps separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. And one thing that I think I really appreciated is the view of the inside. And I think that's something that we don't get too much. And I think recently there has been a lot of investigative journalists who are doing amazing work exposing the inside view of the capital that is driving AI as we know it, like Karen Howe's new book, Sarah Williams' new book on Meta's Careless People. So there has been more public awareness on the logic of capital and the economic systems that are driving this. But I think your paper really shows an inside view into what do those who are actually building this technology and looking at it from a scientific temperament and not necessarily an entrepreneurial temperament really make of it. And I found that to be a very fascinating entry point into demystifying the overall AI discourse as a whole. So a note of appreciation to begin with in terms of why I think this research is so timely and important. And for me personally, why I found it such a fascinating read. One of the things that I have been wrestling with that your paper also provoked me to think about is that I think it's becoming very clear that there is a democratic deficit when it comes to looking at AI. And this idea of the deficit model that you put forth in your paper was really a fascinating view to me into also this idea of AI exceptionalism that you also mentioned earlier in your presentation, of this technology being something that is somehow outside the realm of common understanding or public understanding. And one of the questions that I have been wrestling with is the reluctance or the hesitancy that we observe among the general public when it comes to the implications of AI for themselves, their economies, and their societies is perhaps not necessarily from a lack of understanding of the technology itself and the way that it's engineered, but perhaps this apprehensiveness is also attributed to the fact that the people are deeply aware of how this technology is being produced and to whom the social and economic costs of this technology are actually being externalized. So people, when they see their neighborhoods being taken over by data centers, when they see data workers in Nairobi and India labeling massive amounts of data sets for less than minimum wage while Meta makes its billions, I think there is an increasing understanding among the public of the structures of politics and economics within which this technology is being developed and deployed. So I wonder whether the lack of conversation between the technical community and the general public on this issue of structures and power, which are determinants of how this technology is playing out, is one way in which we can remedy this democratic deficit. Because another very interesting finding from your paper is this fact that 74% of researchers, which is such a vast majority of them, do think that industry is playing an oversized role when it comes to setting the research agenda over here. And your phrasing of let's bring out the citizen in the scientist is so beautiful, and definitely something that I'm going to carry with me in my work going forward is also that question, right? Whether this technology itself needs to be emancipated from the industry kind of going at it headlong in the way that it is currently happening. And maybe researchers and the general public could then find common ground with respect to what this technology might actually afford in terms of positive social and economic outcomes. So sorry about that. Just decline that. But yeah, I wonder whether that's some common ground, because I think there is some recognition that the outsized role of industry and the role of speculative capital in driving the current trajectories of AI is perhaps a preoccupation that both the general public and the scientists can find some common ground on. So I think that's a question that I'm really reckoning with, that this technology is, of course, a socio-technical assemblage. It has different kinds of people invested in building it. It has different types of people who are affected in how it might be deployed. But surely there must be some common ground to really bridge the democratic deficit that is becoming more and more visible as this technology captures more and more of our public spaces. And for me, I think it also raises a pedagogic question, which is, do we have a pedagogical issue when it comes to science and technology education and STEM overall, in that we are delivering it in a disembodied way, in which that questions of democracy, rights, and citizenship are often divorced from questions of building, engineering, and developing. And is that the space of pedagogy also a place in which to catalyze these conversations across disciplines and across constituencies as well? Because at least in the Indian context, it is something that we have been wrestling with and grappling with, which is how to talk to builders in the language of social sciences and through the language of democracy and rights, because there might also be a question of mutual misconceptions over here where we don't speak the same language. So is there also an opportunity for us to build that linguistic divide between the technical community and the public at large? And just a final comment from me, and then I would love to hear your reflections on what we've just shared with you, is that this question of the existential risk of AI is something that I confess I do share. And one of the main reasons that I am so alarmed by AI is because the way in which it's currently unfolding, it's not necessarily that I am worried about, and of course I am, but only worried about questions of individual harms and individual instances of bias and discrimination, but that this technology is increasingly kind of circumscribing the very boundaries of what it means to be human and what it means to connect. We have AI making music, we have AI writing, we have AI doing almost everything. We have AI even teaching. And there is an argument to be made, yes, that this is a democratizing force, but is it also a disembedding force in which all of these questions of creation and teaching are completely divorced from the human experience altogether? So that's one of the reasons why I am so concerned about the rise of AI. And I wonder whether in your survey, this idea of AI being kind of separating us from what makes us human is a concern that was also shared by those who participated in your survey. But overall, I found it such a fascinating piece of work and such a useful entry point in which to have cross-sectoral and cross-disciplinary conversations. So, and I found it a very timely and relevant contribution to the discourse. So thanks very much for your work. That's all for me.
Thanks, Sadhana. That was a lot of information in, I think, 10, 11 minutes. So yeah, well under time also. So now I think because like both Anulekha and Sadhana had some sort of reflections for Jack on his work, if he could address those, and then we'll move on to the question and answer session of the webinar.
Thanks both.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, excellent questions, and exactly the sort of thing I guess that we were hoping would be generated from doing this sort of work, right? That there are questions about what, you know, the technical aspects of doing this sort of survey and the minutiae of what you find, but actually, you know, the important thing is what does it open up? What does it enable? What sort of discussions might it generate? And one of the things that we're really interested in particular, is taking some of these findings back to researchers themselves to get their reflections and do that sort of iterative thing. Let me try and sort of pull out. I mean, there's so many interesting themes in both of what you asked. But if I sort of just try and take them in turn, I think logically that seems to get us somewhere. And Anulekha, if I might just start with your questions, you know, starting with the sort of internalist debate about what does this mean for technical alignment as it's imagined, because alignment is, I guess, one way that computer scientists have sought to internalize some of these questions of values and politics and interpret them as design questions. And I think it's worth recognizing what's going on, but I think we need to understand what's going on, crucially with a view to understanding what the limits of that approach might be. So what sort of things might be amenable to programming, what sort of things might be very convenient to the people currently leading the development of AI systems, and what sort of things might be the sort of things that we need to do, as you suggest, align responsibilities more closely in the political domain. So actually say that this is not a technical task, this is a democratic task. And this is a task for regulation. And one of the things that we have seen, as you acknowledge with your comments on responsibility, is what, I often use the phrase, which is a phrase from Martin Heyer. We've seen an institutional void, right? Typically, we always do when it comes to new technologies. It's not clear what rules apply to them, and the companies involved deliberately employ a form of strategic ambiguity that means that, they can get away with these sort of regulatory Wild Wests for enough time to sort of build their systems. And that my trouble with words like alignment is that it has also taken on this sort of justificatory flavor, that some scientists have talked about alignment as a mode of responsibility. It's like, oh, well, we obviously are taking care of this range of issues, and don't worry, we'll program into these systems and make them better and make them unbiased and make them controllable and all the rest of it. And the danger with that mode of responsibility is that it might actually detract from societally what needs to happen, which is forms of, deliberately democratically legitimate regulation. To the points about, the rapidly changing, rapidly emerging, rapidly scaling AI systems, again, I think, yes, we can recognize those characteristics of the political economy of AI, but also recognize that these things, phrases like, for example, general purpose technology, are also deployed as justificatory strategies to escape accountability, right? That to say that a technology is general purpose is to say, oh, well, therefore we can't ask about where it's going, right? Because it applies, it changes everything. And therefore to ask questions about, well, who benefits, who are the winners, who are the losers, are impossible. And I think we should interrogate questions of trajectory, those questions of where is AI pointing? How is AI research enabling that? How might it counterbalance some of the trajectories that are, say, encouraged, driven by venture capital or other important forces becomes really, really important. So whenever I see these strategies deployed as answers to governance questions, I wonder about the sort of, the claims that are being made and who benefits from those claims. And then, Sadhana, to move on to your views, yeah, I guess, I mean, you articulated it really nicely. The sort of view from the inside is the view that we don't hear, and I'm sort of fascinated to interrogate why that might be. And I think it is because those views are often diverse, they're often inconvenient, right? This sort of ambivalence that does happen within companies, that's revealed by people like Sarah Wynne Williams in particular, challenges a extremely simplified view that we might characterize as hype, that is deployed in order to empower particular businesses. And I think, science, this is a sort of idealized idea from the sociology of science, is that one of the public good aspects of scientific research is that it can be a source of diversity, right? Is that it can multiply questions and perspectives. And therefore, that we can hold on to some of those scientific ideals about not taking those things for granted, about challenging consensus and all those. And that is why, I sort of, it seems idealistic, but I have this view that, originally came from Harvey Brooks, that science can be the conscience of technology. And I sort of hold on to that. And I think that's why it's interesting to interrogate what the scientists actually think. And to your point about pedagogy, also to recognize that the capacities of scientists to engage with these things the appetite for scientists to engage with these things can and should be encouraged. I mean, we do a lot of it at UCL. My team does a lot of training in responsible research and innovation for scientists and engineers doing PhDs at our big science university. And we think that really matters, and we're constantly renewed by the appetite for that sort of thinking to happen among early career scientists. And then you started by sort of going back to some of the big questions about AI. Your points about, you do have some sympathy with big human scale questions rather than, smaller political scale questions. I share some of that view, and it's, we do need to ask those big, and questions that I guess often would be at the sort of, taken on by those in the humanities, maybe rather than those in the social sciences. Questions about, you know, art and culture and what it means to be in the world, in a world in which, things that we thought previously were unique to humans might be in danger of being colonized by companies developing these new systems. My initial concern, though, was, again, it's a sort of claims making thing. How are arguments about humanity as the object of concern being used as a way to distract from questions about politics? Right. So and I guess that was my concern. It's like, what's being hidden behind that rhetoric. But thank you both. It's such a privilege to have such close engagement with work that we've done, and recognition that it was worthwhile. Because obviously behind the scenes there's a lot of researchers doing a lot of sending out, well, in our case, sending out 100,000 emails to AI researchers, and probably adding to their inboxes in ways that created a huge amount of frustration. So there is a lot of gratitude that I need to offer, and it's nice to have our efforts acknowledged. So thank you.
Thank you all so much. I think this conversation went a lot better than I had expected, and I did expect a lot of good things from this conversation. So, and I'm really glad that we were able to pull this off, because, yeah, this is a topic that is not really paid a lot of attention in the wider debate and discourse about when we just look at AI as a whole, right? And even in policy making and even in social sciences. So, yeah, I think the broader sort of implications, or it does have a lot of implications for broader impact of this work, like how Jack was talking about how they initially conceptualized this particular survey to complement a survey for public attitudes, and the sort of the overlaps and the dissonance between those two was also something really interesting that I found. I had a bunch of questions, but I think I'll pick you guys' brains sometime else. And just to end on a positive note, because we have 3 minutes, we can have 30 seconds of, I mean, you can take longer if you want, of final remarks or just something, and then we can get the session done. And it's really nice conversation done. Thank you.
Thank you, Shiva. If we do have just a second, I would be really interested as somebody that observed the original UK AI Safety Summit quite closely. I'll be really interested to get thoughts from those of you that might be closer to the upcoming debates, what we might be able to expect at the India Summit, and your sense of progress, intensification, diversification, how what's at stake there.
My sense is the intention is to move to impact. So basically looking at use cases, so looking at how AI has actually been useful in particular verticals like health, education, so AI for social good, but also kind of surfacing some of the more key questions. Just full disclosure, I'm no longer kind of working very closely. I used to with my previous organization. But just, yeah.
Anulekha, we're losing you again. Yeah, I think
Just as Anulekha was about to say, Sorry, we
Oh,
lost
there you
you,
are.
Anulekha.
Yeah, we lost you
Hi.
just after the previous organization bit. Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. So yeah, no, I think what I was just trying to say was basically obviously looking at use cases for AI in social goods, so actual implementation that has happened and what we can learn from that. But also surfacing questions around trust, safety, and responsible use at the same time. So kind of a cross-cutting approach. And also, I think overall, the idea is to kind of maximize participation both within the country and across, which is why we have like these bunch of pre-summit events that tie in to the broader conversations at the summit. But I think the thrust is how do we kind of make visible some of the impacts that we've been talking about, some of the issues that we've been talking about. How do we do inclusion? How do we think about inclusion? How do we practice trust and safety? So I think that's kind of, in my mind, or understanding the crux of how things are going. So, yeah. So.
Yeah, I would also echo that. I think that's what I have also observed. And in addition to that, I think there is also a bit of a focus on democratizing access to foundational AI infrastructures, whether that's data sets or compute capabilities. And there is a working group within the summit also talking about this. And I think there are ideas of how we can pool compute capabilities, international cooperation. So I think these are some of the themes on a political level beyond the trust and safety and inclusion aspects are also likely to take pride of place at the event.
That's fascinating. Thank you. And it's heartening. I mean, genuine, not just to hear that there's sort of diversity in the framing of it, but also potentially diversity in participation, because the question of the role of civil society needs to be fought for in these sorts of debates, because otherwise they tend to be very high level, a very narrow sense of expertise, the usual suspects.
Okay, so thank you, all of you. I think we are over 1 minute over time, but that's okay. It's not a bad price to pay for a really fascinating conversation. So
Thank you so
thank you.
much,
Yes.
Jack, Sadhana, Shiva, for
Thank you all. That was fascinating. Absolutely.